The town kept cutting back. Streets stayed cracked. Buildings aged without repairs. Meetings ended the same way every year. There was never enough money. Dixon, Illinois was not reckless. It was careful. It planned small and lived smaller. Residents were told the budget was tight. The numbers did not bend. Taxes were already stretched, so people accepted it. They always do. What no one saw was the quiet drain happening behind a locked door. A single office, a single signature, a single account no one else checked. While the town waited, the money moved. It moved clean and fast. It paid for things that did not belong in Dixon. Horses worth more than homes, travel far from cornfields, a lifestyle that never showed up on a balance sheet. For more than 20 years, the same question went unasked. How could a town be broke while one person inside it grew rich? The answer would arrive too late, and when it did, the number would stop people cold. Over $50 million. Gone. Chapter 1. The Trusted Gatekeeper. Dixon, Illinois sat along the Rock River and moved at a measured pace. It was the kind of place where people knew who worked at City Hall and how long they had been there. The town did not expect growth. It expected stability. Keep the lights on, patch the streets, pay the bills. Money was always tight. That was the explanation residents heard year after year. Projects stalled, repairs waited. The city delayed upgrades that other towns considered routine. Council members spoke carefully. They trusted the numbers they were given. Those numbers came from one office. Rita Crundwell had worked for the city for decades. She was the comptroller. She handled the books. She prepared the budgets. She managed the accounts. She knew the systems better than anyone else in the building. Over time, her role became less questioned and more assumed. She was reliable. She showed up. She did not cause problems. In a small town, that kind of reputation carried weight. It created silence. It created distance from scrutiny. Crundwell controlled the flow of money through City Hall. She handled deposits. She authorized wire transfers. She reconciled accounts. She prepared reports for auditors and city leaders. Layers that exist in larger cities simply did not exist here. Too few staff, too much trust. At some point, the checks stopped being checks. Crundwell opened a bank account that did not belong to the city in any meaningful way, though it looked like it did. The name matched what state funds might be called. On paper, it blended in. In practice, it answered to her alone. From that account, money moved out of Dixon quietly. Wire transfers left city accounts and landed where no one else looked. Invoices appeared that no one questioned. Documentation passed through desks without challenge. Each transfer was small enough to avoid attention on its own. Together, they formed a drain that never reversed. Inside City Hall, budgets were built around absence. Crundwell presented shortfalls as fact. There was less money this year. There would be less next year. Departments learned to live with it. Requests were denied. Maintenance was postponed. People adjusted their expectations downward. No one asked whether the town was poor or being emptied. The structure of oversight made the question unlikely to surface. Crundwell prepared the financial information auditors reviewed. She answered their questions. She controlled the files they saw. When issues arose, explanations followed quickly. Timing issues, accounting differences, funds allocated elsewhere, audits closed without alarms. City officials trusted the process because the process had always worked, or at least it appeared to. Meetings moved on, votes passed, the town continued to run. Outside City Hall, signs of strain became normal. Streets cracked and stayed that way. Buildings aged, equipment purchases were delayed. Residents noticed, but they did not suspect theft. They suspected economics. It was easier to believe the town was broke. Crundwell's authority rested on familiarity. She had been there longer than most elected officials. She knew where files were kept and which forms mattered. She understood the deadlines and the systems that fed into state reporting. When questions arose, she had answers ready. Over time, fewer questions arose at all. The fraud did not require bold moves. It required repetition, the same steps taken again and again. Money shifted quietly, records adjusted, balance sheets reconciled to the story already accepted. The town trusted her because the town had never had reason not to. Trust filled the gaps where control should have been. It replaced separation of duties. It replaced independent review. It replaced curiosity. In Dixon, trust was not reckless. It was cultural. Crundwell worked alone in her office often. Files stayed organized, doors stayed closed. There was no chaos to draw attention. The books balanced because she made them balance. Each year, the missing money grew. Each year, the town tightened its belt further. No one connected the two. The fraud did not announce itself with extravagance inside Dixon. There were no public displays, no sudden changes in behavior that raised alarms at City Hall. What happened beyond town limits did not register here. Inside Dixon, the story was consistent. There was never enough money, and the person saying it was the person everyone trusted to know. By the time the numbers reached millions, the system had already failed so completely that failure felt normal. The town had adjusted its expectations to loss without knowing it was losing anything at all. One person stood between Dixon and its money, and no one was watching. Chapter 2. The money trail no one followed. By the time anyone noticed something was wrong, the damage was already measured in decades. Inside Dixon City Hall, the missing money had become part of the background. Budget meetings followed the same pattern year after year. Requests were trimmed, projects were postponed, explanations stayed vague but consistent. Revenues were down, costs were up, there was nothing left to cut. No one asked how a town that never expanded could keep falling further behind. The theft grew slowly, then steadily. At first, the transfers were modest. They looked like routine movements of funds. Over time, they increased in size and frequency. The totals climbed quietly, year after year, without triggering alarms that should have sounded long before. The safeguards that failed were not complicated. They were absent. Crundwell prepared the financial statements. She reconciled the accounts. She worked directly with auditors. In practice, she was reviewing her own work. That alone was enough to weaken any system. In Dixon, it collapsed it entirely. Auditors relied on documents provided by the comptroller. Bank confirmations passed through her hands. Questions were answered by the same person responsible for the numbers. When something did not line up, explanations came quickly and confidently. Timing differences, accounting adjustments, funds held temporarily, the answers satisfied because no one expected deception at that level. As the theft expanded, the town's financial picture grew stranger. Large grants appeared to be missing. State funds did not seem to stretch as far as they should, but the shortfalls were spread across departments, making them harder to isolate. Each office felt the squeeze without seeing the whole. Meanwhile, outside Dixon, Crundwell's second life grew impossible to ignore for those who saw it. Money flowed into a world far removed from municipal ledgers, a world of competitive quarter horses, private planes, luxury travel, and high-end property. The operation was professional, polished, and expensive. Horses were bred, trained, transported, and sold at the highest levels of the industry. None of it connected back to a small-town salary, not on paper, not in conversation. Inside Dixon, few people knew the scale of it. Those who did saw only pieces. A nice truck, time away from work, travel explained as personal business. There was no single moment when the lifestyle and the town's finances collided in public view. Banks processed transfers without flagging the pattern. The account names looked legitimate. The wires came from a government source. No one followed the trail far enough to see where it ended. The normalization of absence became the most dangerous factor. Missing money was no longer shocking. It was expected. When a budget line came up short, it fit the story everyone already believed. The town was broke. City leaders trusted Crundwell because the alternative was unthinkable. Accepting that possibility would mean accepting failure at every level. It would mean acknowledging that no one had been paying attention. So they did not look. The break came not from oversight, but from interruption. In 2011, Crundwell took a rare extended vacation. In her absence, a substitute clerk attempted to access city funds to cover routine expenses. The access did not work. The account that should have been available was not. At first, it seemed like a technical problem. Passwords were checked, calls were made, but the explanations did not settle the issue. The account did not behave like a city account should. That moment forced the first real question in years. When the issue was raised, it did not trigger immediate confrontation. It triggered quiet verification. A phone call to the bank, a request for documentation that bypassed the usual channel. What came back did not match the story Dixon had been telling itself. The account existed. It carried a name that suggested official purpose, but it was controlled privately. The funds inside it did not flow back to the city. They flowed outward. Once that door opened, everything behind it came into view. Federal authorities were notified. Financial records were secured. The pattern that had taken decades to build unraveled quickly under scrutiny. Wire transfers traced back year after year. Totals added up to numbers that did not belong to a town of Dixon's size. The theft was not occasional, it was systematic. Investigators reconstructed the timeline. The methods stayed consistent, the controls never changed. The absence of oversight was not a gap, it was the system itself. Inside City Hall, shock replaced denial. Officials realized the budgets they had debated were fiction. The sacrifices they had demanded were unnecessary. The trust they had extended had been weaponized against them. For years, the money had been there. It had simply been redirected. What stunned investigators most was not just the amount, but how long it lasted. This was not a crime hidden by sophistication. It was hidden by complacency. The question shifted from how it happened to how it was allowed to continue. No single institution caught it. Not the city, not the auditors, not the banks. Each failure reinforced the next. Each year without discovery made discovery less likely. By the time the full scope became clear, the number crossed a line that felt unreal. Tens of millions of dollars removed from a town that struggled to fund basic services. The illusion collapsed all at once. Dixon had not been poor, it had been robbed, and now the trail led to a single person who had controlled everything, answered to no one, and operated in plain sight. Chapter 3. The Bill Comes Due. When federal investigators stepped in, the story stopped being local. What had been treated as a bookkeeping issue became a criminal case almost overnight. Subpoenas went out, bank records were pulled directly. The paper trail that had taken decades to build collapsed in weeks. The numbers did not argue back. Wire transfers were traced year by year. Dates lined up, amounts repeated. The same account appeared again and again. Once investigators saw the pattern, it was impossible to unsee. This was not sloppy accounting, it was deliberate theft. Rita Crundwell was arrested in April of 2012. The charge was wire fraud. The scope was already clear by then. More than $50 million taken from the city she was paid to protect. The figure stunned people who thought they had already processed the betrayal. $50 million was not abstract. It was streets. It was buildings. It was police equipment, fire trucks, and pensions. It was everything Dixon had been told it could not afford. Crundwell did not deny what the records showed. She pleaded guilty later that year. There was no trial drama, no attempt to explain it away. The evidence left no room. The court focused on facts, length of time, amount stolen, position of trust. The sentence reflected all of it. Nearly 20 years in federal prison. But prison was only part of the reckoning. Federal law required restitution. To make that possible, assets were seized: horses, property, vehicles, jewelry, anything tied to the stolen money. The quarter-horse operation that had grown quietly for years was dismantled publicly and completely. Auctions followed. Horses that once represented prestige were sold off to repay a town that had gone without. Even then, the money did not come close to replacing what was lost. For Dixon, the case did not end with sentencing. That was just the moment when the truth became permanent. City officials faced questions they could not deflect anymore. How did one person control everything? Why were warnings missed? Why did no one demand independent verification? The answers were uncomfortable because they were simple. Trust replaced oversight. Familiarity replaced accountability. The town had relied on one person for too long because it was easier than building a system that questioned itself. Residents reacted in waves. Anger came first, then disbelief, then exhaustion. People replayed years of conversations in their heads, budget meetings, tax discussions, delayed repairs. They realized the sacrifices they made were never necessary. They had been told to live with less while someone else took more. The emotional damage ran deeper than the financial loss. Dixon had not just lost money, it had lost confidence in its own institutions. Reforms followed. Financial controls were rewritten. Duties were separated. External reviews were strengthened. The town rebuilt its systems the way it should have built them years earlier. But systems do not erase memory. Every new budget carried the shadow of the old ones. Every official report was read more carefully. Every assurance was tested against what people now knew was possible. The case became a reference point far beyond Dixon. Other towns studied it, auditors cited it, training sessions used it as a warning. The lesson was blunt and hard to soften. Fraud does not require complexity. It requires opportunity and silence. Crundwell's crime did not succeed because she was invisible. It succeeded because she was trusted, because she was familiar, because no one believed a small town could be robbed on that scale by someone they saw every day. Dixon began to recover slowly. Infrastructure projects resumed. Grants were used properly. Transparency increased. The town did not become wealthy overnight, but it stopped bleeding. Still, there was no clean ending. Some losses could not be measured. Opportunities missed, years wasted, trust broken in a way that could not be repaired with policy changes alone. The case left behind a permanent question for anyone in public service. How much power should one person ever hold without challenge? Dixon learned the answer the hard way, not through theory, not through warning, but through absence. Through years of quiet theft that went unnoticed because no one wanted to believe it was happening. The town survived, but it was changed, and the bill, in more ways than one, came due.